Part 2. The Atlantic Slave Trade. America was responsible for her own involvement in the Atlantic slave trade, since her independence in 1776. Any references before that time could easily be blamed on another country. Northern shippers, headquartered in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C., controlled import and export of cargo for the United States. They were also responsible for the human trafficking across the Atlantic. In 1787, South Carolina's legislature voted to ban the import of African captives for the purpose of slavery. The North ignored this ban for 20 years. Then in 1807, they finally announced they would abolish the Atlantic slave trade in 1808. That year, there was an increase of slave ships, bringing African captives into the U.S. before the timer ran out. Even though South Carolina opposed the practice, Northern slave ships blatantly sailed into the port of Charleston, where the slaves were auctioned, and transported to states such as Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, etc. So once the Atlantic slave trade was abolished, do you think the Northern slave traders closed their doors? No. They simply shifted their focus to the domestic slave trade. Human trafficking continued, as the slave traders bought individual slaves from Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia, then sold them to plantations in the Deep South. From 1808 until 1860, families were separated simply for profit. This is the time period in which you hear the worst stories regarding slavery, family separation, and black people being put in chains and sold, downriver. The South wasn't to blame. These were the actions of human traffickers of the North. Even free blacks, living in the North, were kidnapped and sold as slaves, as depicted in the movie, 12 Years a Slave. The main motivation for this was greed. The North was not a self-sustaining economy. It could not function through capitalism. It relied on socialism to survive. Capitalism is a success or failure based on an individual's efforts in a free market. Socialism requires government interference. The South made its money independently, selling cotton to Europe. The North produced goods that were inferior to European manufacturers, so they had a difficult time exporting them. Even the South preferred to buy foreign-made goods. Instead of offering better quality, lower prices, or faster delivery, the North relied on government-imposed tariffs on goods imported from Europe. The money, extorted from the South, funded the economy that captured Africans and sold them into slavery. At first, this tariff was around 11%, but that wasn't enough to prevent the South from continuing to buy goods from Europe. So the tariff increased to 20%. The South complained, and attempted to conduct its own shipping, but in 1833, President Jackson signed the Force Act, which gave the Army authority to disrupt the South's attempts to avoid tariffs and trade directly. When warships threaten cargo ships, this is known as piracy. Vice President John C. Calhoun resigned his position in order to fight for the South. With the help of Henry Clay, a compromise was offered, whereas the North would reduce the tariffs over a period of 10 years. However, the North ignored this agreement, and the tariffs continued to increase, eventually peaking at 48%. The North also declared that any attempt to avoid the tariffs by a U.S. state would be considered an act of treason, giving them an excuse for a military invasion. The only solution was for the South to declare sovereignty and secede from the Union. That way any Northern attack would be aggression, and not a defensive reaction to treason. An unprovoked military invasion would be viewed as an immoral act of tyranny.